Good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Heritage Advisory Committee meeting, the very first one that we're all sitting in the same room together. So welcome, everybody. And so we're going to call this meeting to order. And to get started, we are just going to take a moment of reflection with regards to the business at hand today. Okay, thank you. So because this is a new committee, I think we could take a moment right now and just do some introductions. I know we had a chance to do this at a little bit at the Heritage training meeting that we had a couple weeks ago, but there were a few members absent. So we could just take a moment and introduce ourselves to the group. And if you want to throw in any comments with regards to why heritage matters are important to you, that would also be very much appreciated. So why don't we start on this end of the horseshoe here with Vic, please. Thank you.
I'm Vic Mitchener. Meaford in 92.
Oh, sorry.
Moved to Meaford. Wasn't I loud enough? In 92. So been here quite a while. And I've been on the committee last term and this term. So about coming on 6 years, I guess, 5 years. I think heritage is important to Meaford in many ways, economically, for the community itself, just to enjoy what has been here before. I live in a 1906 roughly house, so always trying to keep things in shape in its original state as much as possible. And look forward to working with the new group.
Thank you, Vic. Let's go ahead, Jan.
Hi, my name's Jan Sedaris, and I'm not in Meaford Town. I'm in Sydenham Township. And for the last 30 years, I've been restoring, trying to keep going the old Woodford Travelers Inn. So, and I was connected with Sydenham Township on that. And heritage is, it's the roots, it's the good health for us, it's everything. And it unites the community. I feel very strongly that heritage is important. And Meaford as a municipality has a tremendous resource in houses and in rock cuts and in barns and all kinds of good stuff that could be turned in financially into tourism.
Thanks, Jan.
I'm Simon Newbold. I have been a resident of Meaford for 14 years now, import from the UK, in case you couldn't tell from the accent. To me, heritage is important. I'm a big advocate for tourism and bringing extra money into the town, but with that, being sympathetic to our history and making sure they work in tandem. Very good.
I'm Joanne McKenzie. I've been a resident of Meaford since the fall of 2009. And like the others have stated, I think heritage is extremely important to the integrity of this community. There's so much to offer, sports, arts and culture, and of course, tourism. There's a lot to see up here, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot about heritage in this community and what we can do to hang on to it. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. My name is Nancy Harleton. I apologize. I missed the training session. So these are new faces to me today. I have lived in the area mostly as part-time since 2002, but full-time since 2012. We have a farm on the 7th line. We have a farm on the 7th line, and I was raised in Bruce County, born in Southampton. And when I left the farm there, I said I was never coming back to the farm. Well, never say never. It seems as I get older, I'm more interested in our heritage, and it's just very interesting to be a part of this community and to be involved in this group going forward. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Heisey. I apologize, I missed the first meeting as well, but I had a pretty good excuse on that. my grandson was born. So that so
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Speaking of heritage, obviously I share everyone's view about heritage. I recognize that there's an economic aspect to it, but it's also, to me, it's important. It makes it a much nicer place to live. And, you know, the danger I find with if you just kind of let people do what they want to do or let the marketplace do what it wants to do, people move every 5 years on average. I realize this group hasn't moved that frequently, but people make big changes and they're gone forever. And so there has to be some tempering or, you know, some caution when you have something that's been there for that long or is important to the community, that people can't just do what they want to do. It has to be considered, you know. So that's why I'm happy to join the committee, and hopefully we'll have some interesting discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Sue and Denise, would you guys like to introduce yourselves to the group as well?
Hi, my name is Sue Brown. I'm the executive assistant to the CAO at the municipality of Meaford. And I'm just here covering for Alex, I think Alex will be here at the next meetings, but I'm here to help her out today.
And I think everybody who either knew me already or met me last time probably heard a little bit more about me then, but I'm Denise McCarl and I'm the manager of planning services. I'm not new to the committee, but I'm newly been added as the staff resource. So I was the author of several of the planning or the heritage reports over the last couple of years, but you'll see me a lot as your resource for these meetings going forward. And I had the pleasure of being able to be on the committee as a resident before I started here in 2002. So I was on the committee from 2015 to 2021 before I started working here as manager of planning services, which was a great experience.
Thanks, Denise. And finally, I'll introduce myself. My name is Brandon Forder. I am a counselor for the municipality, and much to my delight, I was appointed as chair of this Heritage Advisory Committee, and very appreciative to have everybody here at the table. I recognize how important heritage matters is to a community like ours. There are a lot of municipalities that don't have a heritage district or don't have heritage buildings, and that is something that's important for preservation, for culture, for history, and for our future. And if we're able to preserve that, then that is a wonderful thing. If we don't preserve that, it can slowly erode. And then all of a sudden, what we consider to be a heritage district or heritage buildings are no longer such. So with that said, let's move on to next here. So is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest from anybody here at the table today? And seeing none, I'll just remind everybody that at any point in time, if something like that does come up, just please feel free to speak up and let me know. Number 4 on the agenda, unfortunately, that is going to be postponed for a later date, possibly. So we are just going to skip that and move on to the public participation component. And I'm just going to read the text here. Members of the public are encouraged to provide the committee with their comments and questions. Presentations must be prearranged with legislative services before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about specific agenda items at the meeting must register in advance with legislative services by 4 p.m. on June 11, 2024 by contacting sbrown@meaford.ca or 519-538-1060, extension 1170. Presentations are limited to 10 minutes and deputations are limited to 5. I don't see any presentations or deputations today. So we will move on to number 6, which is the approval of the minutes. And I just need to get a first and second to put that on the floor. Thank you. First by Jan. And do I have a second? Second by Vic. Thank you very much. So that is now on the floor. Any questions or comments? Hopefully everybody's had a chance to review the minutes. Okay, all looks good. Everybody ready to vote? So all in favor? Great, and that is carried. Thank you very much. All right, now we're going to be moving on to number 7 in today's agenda, which is the roles and responsibilities and code of conduct. And at this point, I think it's safe to say I'll toss it over to Denise, and we will get it going from there. Thank you.
So I'll just wait a second for I think the presentation is going to pop up on the screen, I think.
Sure.
There we go. And apparently I'm going to be able to monitor it, or advance it with this remote. So fingers crossed. So there's two PowerPoints that we've got for you today. And, you know, we apologize a little bit in advance. We're working hard today. We've got a lot of information to digest. And my hope is that whatever you digest what you can, because there's pretty heavy information. There's lots of training. This is the follow-up to the training that we had the other day. And of course, you've got your packages for those of you who weren't available at that training to be able to refer to. But my hope on this would be that you don't memorize everything, but you'll have these presentations to refer to. And if you ever lose them for whatever reason, you think, oh, Denise, where were those? Shoot me an email and I will redirect you to those. They'll always be on our website under this particular meeting. So you can always go back. But if you don't find it, you don't remember what meeting it was, I'll help you find it. And I don't expect you to memorize all of this stuff. It's a lot. So we're going to go through it in as much detail as we need. And, you know, questions are certainly encouraged on the content if there's anything that we need to go over a little bit more detail. So the first training is going to be just on orientation for committees generally, which would be similar to we give all of the committees that council has struck. And just in case I can't see the screen because my eyes are bad, I've got my own version here. Just to let you know, council established committees by bylaw, and there's several bylaws that apply to the committee. One is the bylaw that established the committee and appointed all of you to be on the committee. And then there's a procedural bylaw on how we operate, how the committee functions. All of our work at the municipality is subject to the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which we call MFIPA. It's a mouthful. And that means that all of the information you've been given, things that make up an application, those things are public information, but some private information, personal information, I'll call it, I guess, can be not provided if it's something like someone's home address, their identifying information and things like that. So we're governed by that act when we provide information out to the public and of course with you as well. So just keeping that in mind. If there's ever any questions, you can always reach out to us on that. And then there's the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And that is generally more related to pecuniary interest, not so much that you're a neighbor of someone or you know someone, but more of a pecuniary nature. But it does affect the municipality. And we have a couple of other documents, code of conduct and accessibility that you should be aware of as well. So you
just hit your mic.
Sorry, I was just going to ask about MFIPA. You indicated some of it could be privileged. Is everything that we have, if I have paper, am I comfortable knowing that that is all public?
Yeah, so everything that's published on our agenda is public already. And if anything were, like, for example, if there was information in an application form that the applicant said, hey, this is my phone number, but I don't want that given out, we can redact that at their request.
But I know that when I got it, I can rely on everything's already been cleared. So I don't have anything I have to protect as my papers.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So an establishing bylaw was passed in 2024 for the committee with adoption of terms of reference, mandate, responsibilities, meetings, administration rules, reporting. We will be going through a terms of reference for this committee in a workshop to update it from the original terms of reference. It was some work that was on, I will say it was on the work plan in 2023 and didn't get completed, and it's going to be picked back up. I think originally we were aggressively hoping to do that in June, but June's marching forward very quickly, and because it's definitely overdue for a refresh, and there was a lot of work put into kind of getting that somewhere last year. So we'll be picking that back up.
Oh, question, Jen?
Through the chair, Denise, when we start on the terms of reference, these are ones that I assume the staff has put together. And have these gone to council to be verified yet? Or is my question basically is, the draft terms of reference done by the past committee, will that be included there for discussion?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the draft that we had or the work that we have will form part of the workshop that we'll be doing. But to say that we're just adopting it, we're not, because we are going to do more of a workshop on it. So we can maybe tweak things or change some things to work maybe with new information and things like that. So we have that draft. We have the old one as well. I also promised that in the next presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I'd said in there that you'll have it as by email, because it's not on our website currently, but I want to make sure that you have it. So I will email it out to you so you can look at the old one, because it's good to know where we came from, to know what's kind of missing and what we need to add in. So that will be coming in upcoming workshop that this committee will do as a project to kind of get that going.
And yes, thank you. And through the chair, that once we finish the workshop and everything is comfortable, it'll come back to committee and then be sent to council. Is that correct?
Once the committee is finished with it, it will go to council, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
The procedural bylaw governs the proceedings of how we run council, and it also extends to advisory committees. So it has to do with what the outline of the way that the meetings are, how they're structured, how voting happens. And I believe there's a link to the procedural bylaw in the agenda. That just makes sure that the meetings are conducted in an orderly fashion and that we know the makeup of them generally. So all of the decisions made by the committee, and by decisions, what I mean is asking for something, making a recommendation, adopting minutes. These are all the kinds of decisions that the committee makes are made by motion. We've already had a motion today, which was to adopt the previous minutes. This committee does function in a formal manner like this. So just being aware of how it works is important. And so this slide kind of gives you an example of how a motion would be made and how it would be read out. So I think that's just important, just to be aware of how committee function, maybe a lot different than other types of committees that we have that are a little bit less formal. Voting, as you know, is 1 vote per member. So you would put your hand up when you make a motion or when you're voting on a motion. Every member who's present needs to either vote or you're voting against or abstaining from that vote. If there's a tie vote, then the motion does not pass, so it's defeated. And as I said, it's completed by a show of hands. New for 2024. We're pretty excited about this. We had our first one the other week, and so I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess. Now that I think about it, time is flying by. What that is we're having a preparatory meeting before the agenda is published to review what's going to be on the agenda, to make sure that that agenda is got everything we need to have on it. Just so you know, 2 of the members of the committee and myself and Alex and everyone agreed to this heavy duty meeting today. So if you want to give us a hard time about all these PowerPoint presentations, we really wanted to give you everything we could, but I was a little worried it was too much, but we were sure that by the end of their discussion that it was enough. You guys can digest it later if you need to, but that was what we did at that committee meeting, was to talk about, or that agenda review meeting, talk about the 2 permits that we have to review and any other reports. And we also talked about what kind of training we needed for the part 2, being part 1 being the training we had the last meeting. And this just shows you the general way the agenda is structured. You've seen it already in the published agenda that you got the other week. This will be the same pretty much for all meetings. The difference would be for a training meeting or something like that, where we may have to add some things to it. Unless there is a training meeting where that's all we do. This would be the normal agenda. And this slide's just to help you understand the timing of how things will roll out. So the agenda review meeting is 2 weeks before the meeting. as we did this last month or last one as well. So the chair included a member of the advisory committee in a rotated manner. So we started out with someone who agreed to be the first victim at the meeting. Then we published the agenda a week before the meeting. So you'll always have a full week to see the agenda and start digesting some of that information. It's published in our iCompass portal and it's available on the public side. So members of the public can download that or take a look at it on our website. We send an email out to all of you to tell you that that's published. And we hope that you'll have a chance to read through the agenda and the materials in advance. And if there's any questions on that agenda, we had one this time, and you'll probably note that I had responded by providing a little bit more information to everybody. That's what we hope that you will do. So if there's anything that you notice that you need more information on, or there's something's not clear, or there's an error that you want to point out and have corrected, please let us know and we'll funnel that back out to the committee as a whole so everyone has that same information. So a lot of the questions we get are really, really great. We do rely on you if you notice anything unusual that you need to be brought back or more information on. And then on the meeting day, we just ask that if you can't make the meeting to let us know. We don't have hybrid meetings, so we can't have someone be in remotely as part of the members. So it is important for us to know if you can attend so that we can make sure we have quorum. And then we're going to post the draft minutes the Monday following the meeting so that you can take a look, and they'll be on the website. Meetings are live streamed. They're archived on YouTube, so you can watch them later if you want. Meetings are held in the council chambers generally. The calendar on our website has the schedule for the year, so you can take a look at that for a reference as well. But the members should have a calendar of the meetings. Meetings can only be held if there's quorum. So if we don't have quorum, which is half the committee members plus one more, then we can't hold the meeting. So we have to cancel. And what we just want to remind you is that a quorum of committee members, so that's that 50 members, 50% of the members plus one is considered quorum. So if you're meeting outside of this meeting, that is not the way that this is supposed to function. So a quorum of committee members are not to discuss business outside the formal meeting setting. It's supposed to be in an open session that is that we have a record of. We can talk a little bit more about how we've done some work outside of that, where we had a smaller group do some work. We've done some site visits together in smaller groups that are not quorum, done some other types of projects where groups of 2 or 3 are able to do that on their own. So that's not the same thing as having a meeting outside of this forum. Committee members will sit in the council horseshoe during the meetings, so just like you're doing now. And just remember to turn your microphone on and off. There is some muscle memory there. It's hard to remember sometimes, especially if you're not doing this on a regular basis. And presentations they have to be arranged in advance, which is Councillor or at Mr. Chair Ford did earlier. He read out that blurb to kind of explain what the presentations and the deputations process is supposed to look like. This is an example of where it's really important to get that information in advance so it can be posted to the agenda. The agenda is not displayed on the screens, but you're welcome to bring it with you in paper or with your own computers and have it in front of you.
Oh, sorry, Denise. Yes, Jan, go right ahead.
Through the chair, Denise, is there a possibility, because Heritage is such a research committee, and I mean, you know that ideas, just because you have an idea doesn't mean it's necessarily good until you've had other people put some perspective to it. Is it possibility, the quorum thing, I understand if we have a quorum, you have to have minutes and that. Some of the discussion isn't really worth in the minutes, like it's sort of people bantering ideas and trying to have things perhaps there. Is there a possibility, because the Heritage Committee is so much research. Is it possible to have the, say, 6 volunteers designated a working group so they don't have to be a formal group to discuss? I mean, we've got so many different backgrounds. I'm just wondering if, or is this a question that we could maybe find out about at the workshop?
So in my last several years of experience working with committees and council, groups that would make up a quorum are strongly discouraged. And that's because of the way that it can look like the business of the committee is being conducted without an open meeting. And so we ask generally that people who are striking a subgroup meet those requirements of being less than quorum. And certainly council will know this from other work that they do. Sometimes there's site visits or workshops or events that councilors go to. And it's really important that it's not just for what is happening, but it's also the way that the public might perceive those meetings as well. So if it looks like you could be conducting committee business with quorum, but it's not an open meeting, it just really doesn't look good. And so that would be my recommendation. But if you would like a legislative services answer to that, I'm sure they can provide that. This is Denise from Planning Services answering, but in my experience in the past, it's been strongly discouraged. I've never seen anywhere that we've conducted meetings that way. Even though I know that you're talking about a work group. Generally that would be a working group, a working meeting. So we would have an open meeting and it would still be recorded, but there'd be a different dialogue. We usually follow the same rules that council's under the legislation. And because of that, those types of working groups are usually either done in open session, or if they're not, it's because they're training based only. Kind of like the last meeting that we had, which was training. There's only certain reasons under the legislation that we would hold a meeting that's not open to the public. And that's why, but I can let the legislative services who know this a little bit more inside and out than I would to provide a more formal response if you'd like.
Through the chair, does that mean that I should request it on the agenda for the workshop? Or is it allowed to come up at the workshop just as a general thing? And just thinking that sometimes I know when you're talking about specific properties and that, you really don't want to identify the people, like you don't want to cause people to feel they're being put on the spot when you're talking about their property. And the ideas that come up may or may not have validity. That's all. I just didn't know if there was a way to have just a real honest discussion without it violating privacy, perhaps.
So I think being that it's been your questions recorded, we can, so you got that right. So we will bring back an answer for you for the next meeting. So if the meeting's the workshop meeting, then it'll be that meeting. If it's not, we can just bring it back. Or we could also just email the group an answer as well, but we are happy to bring it back to the next meeting. Now I'm just making sure I haven't skipped one here. Yep, okay. There we go. Yeah, so this was read out by Chair Forder earlier. Member participation is really important to and important to the value of committees generally. We really encourage you to ask questions, and we encourage the public to participate if they feel that the topics are of importance to them. So please make sure you ask your questions. I've provided a little bit of recommendation on this earlier pre-meeting, that your questions are valuable. If you think that was important to you, I'm pretty sure other members of the committee are probably thinking it, and not everyone maybe felt like sharing it at that time. So please go ahead and ask those questions. And council values your input. I mean, that's why they have this committee, because they believe that members of the public who would have an interest enough in heritage to donate your time, your valuable time, that's so important to the community. So please make sure that you participate fully. your advisors to council, you have more time in this committee to digest some of these applications and some of the material that council doesn't have time to do. And that's why they've created this committee. They're kind of delegating some of their working time, their thought time to committees to dive deeper into the content. And you're going to be making recommendations to them and providing advice. And they may not agree. So that last line, they may not agree or approve all your recommendations from whatever advisory committee. This is a generic presentation, but from the advisory committees, but they still value that information. So going into the MFIPA details a little bit more, this just gives you a sense of what kinds of things are part of MFIPA. What are things that are personal information? So when people apply for an application, like a heritage permit or a planning application, most of that information is public. But these things under personal info can be private information. So where they live, if they're applying for a permit on a property that they live in, that can still be personal information and it can be redacted. Some of this stuff would be redacted on request. We don't share the heritage permits or permit applications right now with you, but it has been something that has come up in the past. And it's possible that we would redact a portion of the information just so people's personal information, like their address and phone number and email, doesn't become part of the internet being posted onto the web. So just so for your awareness of what types of things are personal information and protected. Under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, the goal of the act is to protect the public interest. So this is part of what we were talking about with open meetings. It provides transparency and accountability for the work that we're doing. So if decisions are being made or even starting to be made, it's done in a transparent manner. And the act prohibits any member from having a pecuniary interest on a matter. So that it's really heavy on the pecuniary interest is where the Conflict of Interest Act is mostly around. And that's that direct financial benefit from something that would be happening in the committee or in committees generally. Advisory committee members have a requirement to disclose any interest to the recording secretary and provide the general nature of it. And there are disclosure forms available. So please let us know if that comes up. And so it gives you some other examples in here. So that members can't participate in decisions if it's about them, or it's indirect if you're a shareholder in a business, for example, or a family member is also is the applicant, for example, and a heritage permit would be another example of that as a deemed pecuniary interest. A disqualifying interest is greater than pecuniary interest, but that doesn't necessarily mean, it says here, a non-disqualifying interest, members can still participate. That would be something like, I live near the property, or I'm on a club with that person. I mean, we live in a small community, so likely we're going to have projects that come in front of us that we are neighbors of, or we're in a relationship with that person through other work that we do. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a conflict of interest, but you can always reach out and ask for advice in this regard. The Legislative Services Clerks Department would be really happy to help. Some general notes. So if you get an email, most of the emails, we've started to blind copy everybody, and that's just to avoid chatter by mistake, like that people would reply all and then start having kind of like meeting discussion for the meeting. But if you do get an email with everybody on it, please don't reply all, just reply to the sender. So if it's from me or from Alex, we'll make sure that we provide everybody the information that you ask. So if you ask a question about an agenda item, hey, something's missing, or I don't understand something, we'll provide it, and we'll try to do that as quickly as possible. After the agenda has been published, we can't make changes or additions to the agenda, but we can make sure that any missing information is provided to you. And we'll always explain what that was in the meeting. So if I say, oh, a page was missing or something was missing, we would make sure that that's explained. And then this is a link to some of the further information that we talked about the calendars and things like that are on this link. So you can click it if you do it from the PowerPoint, or we can, if you, it's hard to see there, but it is a live hyperlink. Any other questions on this presentation? Just getting the next one up. Yeah, Heritage Advisory Committee, yes. This is the one that I prepared late at night with not a lot of advance notice. So I tried to make it not too heavy, but we'll just touch on the things in a kind of a high level. But at some point, you may have more questions. Please ask them in the meetings separately if you need to, if there's anything that's not clear. The point of this training is this particular PowerPoint is just to get you a little bit more oriented into this committee and why we're here, what we're doing. It builds on what you learned in the training. And for Jan and Vic, it'll be old news probably, but they're going to be your resource as well because they're coming forward from a previous committee with lots of experience. But just so we can all be on the same page and kind of start with at least a baseline of information. And this is the overview of where the direction I'm headed. There's a couple different layers because we have heritage conservation in Meaford. So we're doing heritage conservation now through the program that we have. And we have our committee that helps us with that work. And then there's the kind of granular level of the permits. So we issue permits for some work that people want to do to their properties. There's a reporting structure of how these decision gets made that you fit into. And then I just wanted to give you a little high level of where does heritage fit in planning? Because planning services is the one that's receiving these applications. And it has to fit into the wider system. And then I've given a resource list to you here, and some of those things were not on the web, so I couldn't provide links, and I'm going to email those out to you. Some of those things knowing that they're going to change over time as well. So as we heard at the last training, we have two layers. So we have individual property designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So those are the ones that in almost all cases except one, were pre-existing to our heritage district, and they can be anywhere in the municipality. So they're not in the district necessarily. Interestingly enough, 2 of the 4 properties are in the district and were previously designated before we even had a district, and that is the Fire Hall and Meaford Hall. They're on our heritage register on our website because they're designated under Part 4. And the committee made recommendations to council last year to add a 4th property. One of them, I should backtrack, one of the other properties is in Leith. And then we also have the Bayview property that was added to the register last year by council through the work of the Heritage Committee at the request of the property owner. And then we have the district under Part 5 of the Heritage Act. Districts are a little bit different because the idea is that they have something in common. So they have a common goals, common threads between those properties. In this case, it's a large area. Not all of them are downtown, like downtown buildings, but districts usually have a commonality and they're treated as a system, not individuals necessarily. So our boundary includes the downtown area, the harbor and the waterfront along Bayfield. And I'll show you a map in a minute. This is what if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet in any great detail, it's on our website. It's really sad because we've never been able to update where it says final draft for council approval, but it isn't a draft. It was adopted. It was approved by council in July 2014. It was appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board at the time, and the Ontario Municipal Board made a minor modification to that boundary. then in 2015, after that was finalized, the first Heritage Committee was struck by council. And the primary need was to handle permits in the district because there would be many permits that would come forward in the district. Not a lot of permits for those 4 individual properties. This is the district boundary, right, from the Ontario Municipal Board decision. Because in the book, it's actually got one property, which is the United Church, right, Jan and Vic? Not wrong there. It's the United Church that's, yeah. The United Church was taken out. And so we haven't updated the boundaries since that 2015. It's never changed. But we have had a public meeting to consider updates to the Conservation District Plan and guidelines in 2023. So we had a public meeting to consider those changes or potential changes. And we had a report from the consultant that we had hired it was an opportunities or challenges and opportunities report. It was a pretty lengthy report with some recommendations of things that we could do to change that plan. That hasn't been changed yet, and it's something that we're still have on our work plan to do. So the next thing, what Jan had mentioned was the terms of reference in a little bit more detail. We have a terms of reference that we're still using. It's still active, but we do recognize that it needs to be updated. Updated because we've used it for several years and we realize where it needs to be strengthened. But the mandate is to advise council. So the committee advises council on matters of both those parts of the Ontario Heritage Act, Part 4 and Part 5. And our main focus had been reviewing heritage permit applications. So the committee reviewed those permits and could also recommend other opportunities for protection of heritage properties. In the past, those things took shape, like I'm going back a ways, things like the committee broke out into small work groups. Some of them looked at things like how to create a guide to help members of the public who had properties with brick or masonry in the best ways to protect that brick and masonry as they're doing maintenance to their properties. Another project that this committee did in the past that was really important was related to property standards. We're one of the only, I think you heard this at the training, one of the only municipalities that has heritage in their property standards bylaw. And that was something that got added. There's a few other projects that got done in the past, and those were additional works that the committee did that really helped with some of the heavy lifting of things that staff don't always have time to do. And that included significant research, looking at other municipalities, what they're doing, maybe looking at individual property research. The term of the committee is usually council's term. In this committee, it's slightly shorter because the last committee extended an extra year. And the meetings are open to the public. So those agendas are posted in advance, minutes taken, it's very formal. But I just noted that terms of reference update workshop is going to be very soon. And then I thought it might be useful to you to see what numbers of heritage permits we've had in the last while. It's funny to see that in 2019, we had this huge bump of permits. It's not a lot per year, and a number of them are signed. So last year, we did a whole pile of signs through delegated authority. And then the committee did a few permits as well in the meetings. So to date, I think we have 4 permits applications.
Sorry, through the chair then. Do these numbers include the ones that are done but administratively?
Yes.
So that's total then.
That's total. Yep.
Thanks.
And this isn't going to be readable from this level, so I've broken it up, but it explains the reporting structure. So I'm going to go to the next one here. This is where you fit in, which is a huge part of it, to provide that advice to council. So council aren't experts in heritage necessarily, and they have so much other work to do that this committee becomes really pivotal to have that discussion, ask the great questions, and probably learning over time to become heritage experts in your own right. So starting out with the application. So this is zoomed in from the first pillar here. So applicants submit application to the municipality and staff sets up a file and we open up a file in an application. And at that point we realize, hey, what is our timeline that we have to work within? We do that with all of our planning applications as well. So it's not new to us. We do a review and we provide feedback on the application. Sometimes they change, sometimes they don't, if people don't accept our feedback or they can't make changes. And then staff prepares a report for you and gets this ready to go on the agenda. So the next step, we have these meetings and you will look at different applications. So you're going to hear the applications. You'll receive reports from us. You get to discuss them, ask questions. Applicants can appear to speak on their own file to you. And you can ask questions of them as well. And then you'll make a recommendation. And the options for making recommendations really are only 3 things under the Heritage Act. You can recommend that they approve it, that they approve with conditions, or that they refuse it. There isn't really a 4th option, which might be like, put it on pause, let's not do it, let's not make a decision, let's kick it back to the applicant to go back to the drawing board. That's not to say that if they heard, I would call it negative feedback from you that doesn't sound like you're going to recommend approval, they can always go back, and this is the same with planning applications as well. They can always go back to the drawing board and make changes if they get some feedback that doesn't sound like you would recommend approval. We try to field that beforehand. So when we get applications, if we think, ooh, this doesn't meet a guideline. I don't think this is going to be well received. Here's why. And we usually point to the document. We try to give them that feedback. Sometimes we ask for more drawings, more pictures, and sometimes they comply and give that to us, but we can't make them give it to us. We do our best to try to get you the best information we can. And then you kind of have to work with what you've got, and just like we do when we're writing our report. And it's been frustrating sometimes because not everybody wants to give us what we ask for or what we wish they would. And so we're working with what we've got. Then once you've made your recommendations, so in a perfect world, you love the drawings, you love the idea, it fits in the guidelines, no issue, and you recommend approval. I would be preparing, if it were me and mine, I'll be doing this for probably some of the ones today. I prepare a second report for council, which points back to the first report that we gave you and adds a few other details, including things that the committee said and recommended, and they would get your recommendation in full. They would be hearing it as well in their council meeting. They're going to get the report. They can ask questions as well. And, our chair is Councillor Forder, who would be speaking for the committee at council as well as the representative. If there's questions or concerns, our committee reps are able to do that for the committee. And then our staff reports will note those concerns as well. Then council makes a decision. So as I said, in a perfect world, they would just say, oh, the Heritage Committee thinks it's good. They've recommended approval, we'll approve. And then they would make that decision. But that's not how all of them work, obviously. Some of them have conditions applied. Some of them may not get approved. So then once that happens, we would issue a decision to those applicants and give them a permit. So if, for example, it was approved, we would actually create a permit and they would be able to upload that with their building permit application. So because building permits can't be issued until they have their heritage permit. If they're in the district, for example. And it's important to note that decisions can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So it's just like a planning application. It goes through a similar process, except a second step, which is this committee. And those decisions can be appealed. So they have those rights to appeal if they don't get the answer that they wanted. It only gives us a taste of what we deal with on a regular basis, but in Planning 101, we have so many layers and we have it as a bit of a pyramid. But obviously provincial legislation is the top, and we take our marching orders and legal framework from provincial legislation. And those are things like the Planning Act, Municipal Act, Heritage Act, the Building Code Act. And then there's provincial policy. And previously it was called the Provincial Policy Statement. It's being updated to be the Provincial Planning Statement. But that has policies for protecting significant heritage resources in it. So it has been considered important to the province as well. And then we codify that, if you will, in our local policies. And those would be things like the official plan with our heritage policies that we have. And the official plan allows us through its structure to create a heritage conservation district as well, which we have in our heritage conservation plan. And then we have our local bylaws, our zoning bylaw. Being able to establish a heritage committee, the procedural bylaw, property standards bylaws, these all fit together. And then we have other tools like other processes like site plan control. An example of that would be for the old fire hall that had to come for a heritage permit to this committee last year. They did a site plan approval process as well. And then it also went to, and that heritage permit went to council for approval. The site plan approval process was also part of this. It's part of provincial legislation, but the process itself happens in a different sphere. And they, in a site plan agreement. And there may be other policies and standards like the engineering standards or things like that, that they have to work within. And the answer of where does heritage fit? In short, it's everywhere. It's in every layer. So we have provincial legislation that in the Heritage Act, but it's at every level of policy and the bylaws. So it's everywhere and it's complicated. So we try to bring those things down to the level where we can work with it with the policies that we have to use every day, like the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Looking at the time. So there's a laundry list of resources here. And, you know, I mean, everyone has the ability to, you know, make this their second hobby, their main primary hobby at home, where they're just looking at the Ontario Heritage Act all night long after work or after you're out having a walk. But I don't expect you to do that. It's provincial legislation is very hard to read, but, you know, you should be aware of it and be aware of that it's where our framework comes from. And you're welcome to dig down as much as you feel comfortable doing. We have a municipal heritage page on our website, and it's not as fulsome as it could be. It could be a lot better, and it's something that we've got on the work plan to improve. Our heritage register, which is now required to be on our website as of July 1st, I think 2023. It is, and that includes our report for properties with a lot of detail. And that's where the personal information is not personal anymore because the legislation requires us to have ownership information about those properties on that public document. So the guidelines are on there. Those Heritage Conservation District Planning guidelines are the thing that we really want to update. It's just as important as the terms of reference. It needs to be strengthened a little bit and maybe clarified so that we have more to work with, more to go on when it comes to our review. And the procedural bylaw I've noted in the terms of reference that we're going to be updating. I will email you the terms of reference so you have where we started so that you can see what we've got to work with and why we're ready to move on to something a little bit more rigorous. Further reading, the Ontario Heritage Trust has some great information on their website. It's a really wonderful resource. Our zoning bylaw, that link takes you to the zoning bylaw page. That page, what's so wonderful about the online mapping tool is it's got a layer for the district. So people who are looking up their property can add that layer. I've talked people through on the phone how to find that, and it will tell you whether or not you're in the Heritage District. The challenges and opportunities report was like the background information, or that would be leading us up to updating the Heritage Conservation District Plan. That was, like I said earlier, was done by a consultant who went through with a fine tooth comb and came up with all kinds of areas that we could really strengthen and improve our plan. But we haven't moved forward with it yet. So it's something that we have to go back to do. And this committee will be really helpful, I think, if we get that on our work plan for this year to try to start moving that ball forward. The Heritage Assessment Report that was the background information to the Conservation District study, that was done the previous year. I can distribute that to you by email if you want more information about what properties were what. That probably went out to people at an earlier time period in the committee, so they probably had access to it previously. It may have been shared in a council agenda way back. Our online records don't go back that far, back to 2013, so we can't go back quite that far on the website in council's reporting structure. So if we go to agendas and minutes, I don't think it goes past 2015. But I bet you it was probably shared that way publicly already, and some people had it. I want you to be able to have it if it's something you're interested in. What that does is it goes property by property for the whole district and has a little summary of each building. And it would say whether it had what was the consultant we had at the time, what was heritage value. As you can probably guess, not every building, not every structure in the district is heritage building, like the gas station or, someone puts up a gazebo or something like that recently. There's lots of properties that aren't, but lots of them are in that, assessment report gave a little bit more detail on that. And it can be helpful for you as you're reviewing permits and things. I refer to it myself from time to time. And then our property standards bylaw that I mentioned earlier has some great information about how we specifically look at heritage. So the old property standards bylaw, before it got augmented with heritage information, just like a lot of other municipalities, would require, for example, say you had some brick on a property that was just falling off, plopping down onto the street, and we're worried about safety. We would require someone to shore something up, remove anything dangerous that might be falling down, but it wouldn't have allowed us to preserve heritage features. So if somebody had a heritage feature that was actually falling down, we would ask them to take it down in that old bylaw because that would be safer. But that also allows for things like demolition by neglect, which you've probably heard that term. It also allows someone to just not do anything with their property, and then those heritage features actually crumble away. So the heritage aspect of the property standards bylaw helps make sure that doesn't happen. And we're pretty proud of that being added into what we have. And that's it for the presentation, but I'm sure you may have other questions, and it was a lot. Hopefully, if there's anything I miss sending out to you that you need, there's those 2 documents I mentioned, I'll send them to you by email. If there's any links that aren't working, let me know as well. There's a lot of information there.
Very good, Denise. Thank you for that comprehensive review. That's wonderful. So let me just see here. I just need to get past my notes. Pardon me a moment here. Okay. So are we on the procedural bylaw now? Is that the one that we're at? 7C? I just want to make sure I'm on the right item number. Did we pass?
I think code of conduct. I wasn't planning to deep dive into this code of conduct, but we can go over it a little bit, or
Sure.
people can read it on their own. I'm happy to do either.
Okay, well, why don't we go over it? Just it's our first opportunity to be in the same room together. So if
Perfect.
you mind humoring us, that would be much appreciated, Denise. Thank you.
No problem. So we have a code of conduct that works for all advisory committees and volunteers. It's similar to council's code of conduct. And what it's going to cover in this report, I gotta flip both of them. What we're going to cover is like the municipal act requirements, but then also the advisory committee code of conduct and how complaints get handled. So since 2019, the act has required councils to adopt a code of conduct, and that applies to councils and local boards. Section 223.2 subsection 1, a municipality shall establish codes of conduct for members of the council of the municipality and its local boards. The municipality of Meaford had a code of conduct for advisory committees and volunteers prior to this requirement. I remember signing one and entering into one. And it gives the bylaw 2016-23. And it requires the municipality to appoint an integrity commissioner to investigate complaints. So that's how we investigate complaints here. The integrity commissioner becomes an arm's length to do that. So the policy statement is the municipality of Meaford values the important contribution of its volunteers, including advisory committee members, which are appointed by council. Volunteers are expected to carry out their duties in a manner consistent with the municipality of Meaford's values of respect, integrity, and community. I think everybody would agree with that statement. The purpose. A written code of conduct helps ensure a common basis of acceptable behavior. These standards demonstrate how volunteers conduct themselves as ambassadors of the municipality of Meaford. The statutory provisions regulating conduct, the code does not replace or supersede any statutory provision. For example, Human Rights Code or the Municipal Act. General provincials and principles and values. They support the mission, vision, and values and respect decision-making process of council, maintains professionalism, integrity, respect, and trust, promote open, accountable, and transparent local government, encourage public respect for the municipality, its bylaws and policies. And we kind of talked a little bit about that before. I mean, council is the one who makes ultimate decision-making. And we have to respect that decision making, even though we don't agree. So my role isn't much different from yours because I'm making recommendations to you and I'm doing a summary and kind of disseminating information. You're making recommendations to council, and then they have the ability to kind of decide one way or the other. And they need that information to kind of make those decisions, but sometimes they have to make a tough decision and we may not agree with all of the decisions. And we need to keep that to ourselves, which is what we heard in our last training. We respect that's what council's there for. Obviously dignity and respect. I mean, that goes both ways. That's so important in how we conduct ourselves without abuse, bullying, intimidation, discrimination, harassment. Legislative requirements include workplace harassment and violence policies, obviously decorum in meetings, refrain from public criticism that questions reputation, competence, and credibility, and conduct respecting staff that will not injure reputation. Compel to engage in political activity, interfere with staff duties. That can be obviously very challenging for staff. We work for the public, so we're public servants already, which means we already take a lot of abuse from the public that aren't subject to this code of conduct. But we know that when volunteers work with us, they already kind of buy into this because they're volunteering their really valuable time to, give back to the community in this way. Other people are doing other things, physical, manual labor, digging flower beds and things like that. And you folks are here on a beautiful sunny afternoon doing this type of committee work. Advice that is politically neutral based on expertise and objectivity, devoid of undue influence. And only council as a whole has the ability to direct staff. So yeah, council knows that, but council acts as a whole, not as individuals. Standards of behavior and conduct, more of the enforceable stuff. Advisory committee member conduct, fulfill the mandate and terms of reference of the committee. And as we update that, the bones of what the terms of references are likely not to change. It's more of the meat of what that the committee is there for and what it's there to do. That will be updated. Respect due process and authority of the chair and council. Demonstrate respect and give fair consideration to diverse viewpoints. Represent the community. Contributes in a meaningful, constructive manner. Support committee recommendations. Does not act in a manner whereby personal benefit could be obtained, and declare conflicts where necessary. What if there's a complaint? So the integrity commissioner investigates, and there can be sanctions if the integrity commissioner investigates and determines that there was a breach. There can be a reprimand, a written or verbal apology is required at a meeting, removal from a committee or local board, removal as a chair, suspend or remuneration of a committee for a period up to 90 days. You folks don't get remuneration, but return of property or reimbursement. And then we've got questions on that. Does anyone have any questions on the code of conduct?
I feel it's pretty straightforward. Just be a decent person and be a good team player. Wonderful. So for those following the agenda, we're going to move on to item 7C, which is the procedural bylaw.
So the bylaw is 34 pages long, so we won't go through all of it, but it goes through the different sections to talk about how we're going to conduct our meetings, how we're going to, it talks about like the majority of members make quorum, which is that 50% plus one. And it governs how the municipality conducts all meetings. It's something that we rely on a lot. So it is here for you to digest, and we're happy to answer any questions on it. I don't want to go through it in too much detail because it's so heavy duty. Some of the things we've touched on already, which talks about how we operate within the meeting itself, and talks about, like, for example, what we talked about under task force or working group, a body of limited duration established by council through terms of reference to produce recommendation for council's consideration. Those are the types of working groups that break off or could be established as a ad hoc committee or group. Not necessarily this committee just conducting a different meeting. It talks about how the chair operates. I'm scrolling through conduct of members. Some of it is similar to the code of conduct, things like not using unparliamentary language or offensive words, that kind of thing. How the meetings get conducted from the first meeting, the inaugural, and then each meeting after that, and how they're open to the public. If there's any parts of this that you don't understand and you want more further explained, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll help you. I'm not an expert in the procedural bylaw. We use it for our other committees as well. We have a procedural bylaw for our committee of adjustment as well. And it also talks about the length of meetings, because the idea is not meant to be here all night talking about content. We do try to break it up if we can. This is our heaviest meeting, hopefully, that we have this year, other than maybe the workshop. Is there anything else, Mr. Chair, that you would like me to go over on the procedural bylaw?
Not that I can think of. Is there anybody have any questions or comments with regards to this item? No? Okay, I think we can move on. Thank you, Denise. Very good. So moving on to number 8 on our agenda, 8A. We're on heritage permit applications. So we finally get to the meat and potatoes of our agenda here. So item 8A, HAC 2024-03, heritage permit application HERO2-2024, 54 Sykes Street North. The recommendation that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Council of the Municipality of Meaford approve a heritage permit for 54 Sykes Street North to allow projecting commercial sign with the following conditions. 1, that the sign is installed with minimal damage to the brick facade. And 2, that any required variance to the sign bylaw is approved. Can I get a first and second to get that on the floor, please? Great, Joanne, thank you very much. Could I get a second for that as well? Joanne, thank you. Okay, so this is where we get to talk about it. Questions, comments? We're ready to go. Vic, yeah, please go right ahead.
seems to fit in with things. The powered and illuminated thing had me going until I saw that that had been amended and it wasn't going to be powered and illuminated. But I'm just wondering, kind of related to this, if we should consider as part of the new plan, and I guess this would affect the signage bylaw at all, but is, allowing small projecting signs, because they have been allowed on Main Street already. They exist and they don't really seem out of character for the Heritage District. So that was just something I thought I'd mention. I have a question about the 90-day period, but that can be reviewed afterwards. Other than that, it seems fine to me.
Very good. Thank you, Vic. Anybody else? Peter, go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. I similar to what you were talking about, because when you look at the sign, to me, it raises a question. If you approve this sign, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I presume that would mean if I'm the next door neighbor and I want one, I can have one, and it's not although this is only a one-off, and I realize we're considering each application as they come. It does beg the question of what is the policy, and I was speaking earlier about that you're right, there are some existing ones. There aren't a lot of them, but there are some. And I don't know whether they were legal non-conforming, that is pre-existing, or whether they were things that have been approved in the past, or people just did them. That's always that possibility too. I don't know if we know that from the terms of the city or the town.
Go ahead, Denise. Thank
To
you.
you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, we had a brief discussion that we paused so that we could do it in the meeting, which was just to talk about the fact that there are some pre-existing ones. There's also some in the package shown. I think there's might be at least one in the pictures, but I was going to say the ones that we've seen in the signs generally, some of the example ones have those little hangers with, say, a circular sign. I think the difference is, I don't know the circumstances about how those other ones got approved, because I didn't look into it as part of this review. But when I went through the chart, some of those may or may not have hit these other issues. So when I look at the chart on Appendix 3 that I created, just to kind of give me hey, do you meet this policy? It looked like almost all of the things that were a no or unknown were really that there's 3 that were no's, and they seem to be all the same thing from what I could read. And they spoke mostly to that traditional sign area. So if there had been no facade sign now, and they wanted to put a sign that's projecting in that sign band area, it might have been permitted as of just met the guidelines. And because it wasn't, and it's a separate piece below, that's why it's coming before you. So it's not necessarily, and in my report, I explain this, it's not necessarily that we shouldn't do it, to Member Peter's question or comment. It's more on, it doesn't meet the guidelines perfectly, and that's why it's here in front of you versus a delegated approval, because the delegated approvals bylaw says if it meets everything and it's minor, so if it meets the guidelines and it's a small thing, especially something more temporary like a sign, then it can be delegated to staff. But if it doesn't meet the guidelines, and in this case, I flagged 3 guidelines that doesn't quite fit, even though I would say they're the same one multiple times. Talks about the traditional, all projecting signs shall be located in the traditional sign area, to me is the same as corporate logos, icons, and signage motifs may be printed on building facades or storefronts, provided they're appropriately reduced in dimensions to fit within the sign band or signed to fascia sign band. So it's not within that sign band area. So all 3 talk about the traditional area. So it's really not 3 different things. And because of that, it's still something that didn't conform. And that's why I wanted to bring it to you, because our delegated approvals doesn't allow me to make that kind of judgment call on it. And let you decide whether you agree that it could be permitted. My take on, would a decision like this on this one mean everyone could have the same thing? In my opinion, is not the case because each one's reviewed as an individual situation and every property is going to be a little bit different. I don't think there's any downtown properties that are identical. But it can come up as a question. So likely if someone got up an exception and then another person thought, I'd like to have that too, they would point to the previous decision. Even though I'm telling you that there's no precedent setting here, people probably would bring it up and we just have to be able to manage that expectation that the reason this one was given it was because of these reasons. And the location that they're asking, it's kind of not much is going on in that spot. It's just sort of in between two doors. And so I thought of it as very, very minor impact. But I really wanted to bring it to you to hear more from you folks about whether you saw the same thing I did.
Sorry, just so I understand though, I take it it's not, the fact that it's protruding is not really the problem. It's the fact that it's not in the sign band area. In other words, so that is, otherwise it would be and it was in the sign band area and it was protruding, that would be a minor sign.
Probably, yeah. So those ones that are traditional style have been, I think, approved previously. I just can't think of those, like I can't say, oh, such and such street, that one was 3 years ago, we did that one. I can't think of any offhand. I don't know if any other committee members that were here before remember any, but this particular one didn't 100% meet the guidelines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Yes, Vic, go right ahead.
Well, just to that, I think the dam pub one is fairly new, and I think that was done under delegated approval. And I think it's below the band. And in fact, as I've just started to realize, even though those bands have been considered signage space, if you go way back, they weren't always there. There were taller windows that went up higher. So it's kind of a modification already. But anyway, just a comment.
Thank you, Vic. Denise, did you have a comment on that?
I was just going to say, I just recorded Member Vic's comment about, hey, this might be something we want to look at, just dealing with a little bit in the Heritage Conservation District Plan update. Like, is there something that we can clarify about signage? And I've made a note about that. So it's sort of, I want to park that first to be brought up later when we do that project.
Appreciate that comment. Thank you. And next over to Jan. Thank you.
Just a construction question, curiosity. This sign is between two doorways. It's going on to old brick, which is, I'm understanding behind that is concrete, which possibly will be quite old also. Is there a backer board behind that concrete, because it's between two doorways, that they could lag this into? Because a projecting sign, if it lets go, it could be a liability problem if somebody gets issued. I'm just curious to know, because it's between the two doorways and there is concrete there as the back, is there something behind it?
So I was just going to ask if the agent is on the line by Zoom.
I have 3 here.
Okay. Do you have someone named Sarah?
That's Michael and Mercy.
I don't know any of those folks, but someone was supposed to be on the line to speak to the Rexall sign. Okay. So my suggestion, if it works, I think this is what we usually do. Now I'm thinking, when was the last Heritage Committee we had? February. Why is it so hard to remember? The questions that the applicant would be better to able to answer. So it's the person that I was speaking with is the sign person. So they're the agent from the sign company. So they probably have that answer, where I wouldn't. It may be that this sign needs a building permit, which would prevent, because it is going to be projecting over the travel public, like the travel portion of the sidewalk. So it probably needs a building permit as well, which would answer that question in a later stage. But I think the applicant's agents can probably answer that. If it's something where we want to take it might procedurally work to have all the questions that we would want to ask them after the committee's done asking me any questions. If there's any more questions for my report, for example, we could park that question and let them do a little discussion back to us about those items. And that way we're not doing too much back and forth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Oh, yes. Hi. Sorry, who's on the line?
I'm Patricia Ordaneta. I'm representing Rexel. I'm Director of Store Design.
Wonderful. Happy to have you on the line. Thank you very much for your time. And I think we had a few questions from those in the committee here. So did you want me to let you take that, Denise?
Sorry, I didn't catch who was on the line. It's not Sarah.
No,
Is it? Okay.
no, Sarah could not make it. She represents the signage vendor and the ones that submitted the application on Rexel's behalf.
Okay, so the
And I am representing Rexel. I am Director of Store Design for Rexel.
okay, thank you. Did you want to answer the question about how the sign is going to be attached to the building?
I could give you a high level approach on how the signage is attached. Typically, we do have a care for the building and the application that the building is going to. We have, through Jones signs, installed some other types of signage in buildings like this where there is brick and where there is concrete. Typically, there is minimal impact to the brick. The insertion of the brick is usually between, like, through the mortar in between the brick. And it should not interfere with the state of the building whatsoever, or else we would not be considering this option. The application has the detail section of how this is planning to be installed on the brick and the concrete block.
Okay, thank you for that. We had a question from a member of the committee that wanted to know what the material was behind the brick. Is it brick, then concrete, and then what is behind that? Are you able to comment on any of that, please?
Yes, I believe there is a brick column on concrete block.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Jan?
I assume under the building permit, it's going to be a secure sign. My only thought was if we recommend a sign and it falls on somebody, I like to avoid liability and pain and all the rest. But it's just going through, you're going through old brick, which will be fine. The facade sounds very good, but you're going into old concrete, probably, and then because it's between two doors, is there something behind that concrete, like a backer board, that you would secure the sign to? It's just a liability issue. It's not a big thing. I think the sign's a great idea, but I just was curious. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear. We don't want liability on our end either, no one to be hurt. I would say the vendor is recommending what they know it will be secured. If there is a backer board requirement, we will definitely be happy to abide to that. That would be better answered by the signage vendor, and we can for sure make sure that the permit application it is in compliance to that. There shouldn't be any problem. And again, I would think that the way that the signage vendor is proposing to be installed, it is the way that they have installed it not only for Rexel, but for other vendors as well. But this is the same applications that we do in other instances, typically in smaller towns, airing, and we did something similar to this. In the condition of the building was pretty similar to this scenario.
Very good. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Peter, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say that I have, in terms of liability, because that's kind of what I used to do. I'm assuming that the town in cases like this, where not that it's really a heritage issue, but I'm assuming if there are approvals like this granted, which extend over a municipal sidewalk, that there is an agreement with the adjoining property owner to indemnify the city and also provide a certificate of insurance naming us and as an additional named insured.
So I think that was originally, we did have that in the sign permit application as well. So the sign permit application talks about encroachment agreements and our, same, to your point, Member Peter, the two processes both speak to that. So the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Guidelines talks about a encroachment agreement may be required. And I wasn't sure whether it was required, but just had put that as a condition that if it is, then obviously we should have it. So that you're just feeling satisfied that that part was covered, right?
Well, and those encroachment agreements usually are not kept up in my experience. So I think it's almost better if you have an agreement, you put that in the file and it sits there forever, you know?
For sure. And so the sign permit, because this requires two permits, it requires a sign permit completely separate.
Yeah.
And fun fact, the sign bylaw is a lot stricter than the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Guidelines guide around signs. It's really specific about sizes of lettering and all these things. And it talks about that in there as well.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, if you have that kind of an agreement and you're an additional named insured, you should be covered by that.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Any other questions from the horseshoe here? No? And Peter, just don't forget your mic there. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. I don't think we have any further questions. Appreciate you being on the line and thank you very much for your comments.
Awesome. As a next step, then could I advise our signage vendor Jones to apply for the signage permit as per the way that we have submitted to this application?
So we have both applications in process right now, and the next step will be to, I believe there's a variance to that sign permit as well. And so those would all be going, anything would be processed kind of concurrently. And then our next step is to take any decision on like what was to be recommended to council at the next available meeting. So I've already started writing that report just to get it ready, and it would be going to the next council meeting. I'll be just backfilling whatever the committee recommends.
Awesome. Perfect.
Okay. Very
Thank
good.
you very much.
Okay. So before I call the votes, any other questions or comments on this item at all? Okay, so I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? All right, that is carried. Thank you. Moving on, we have item 8B, HAC 2024-04, Heritage Permit Application HER 04-2024. That's for 183 Sykes Street North. Recommendation that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Council of the Municipality of Meaford approve Heritage Permit Application HER 04-2024 for 183 Sykes Street North. And I just need to get a first and seconder to get that on the floor, please. Thank you, Joanne. Got a second? Vic, thank you. All right. Comments, questions?
This is the one where you provided the additional information, correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's correct. So the additional information I believe was about the, which I got from the building permit application. I was talking about that it was wood material, and I believe, was it 6x6 posts, I think I provided, and some board and batten. And the applicant is here in person, so we can ask some additional questions of them after you do some initial fact finding if you wish. And you can ask direct questions of the applicant, and they can also speak on their behalf at that time. Because they may have some, Mr. Trumper will probably have some more detail about what he's planning than what I have. I have kind of just what's in the file. This was Meredith Gillespie's file, which I picked up while she's on vacation. So I'm going to do my best to answer your questions, and hopefully you're not too rough on me.
No, I just wasn't clear where the board and batten fit into based on the drawings that we saw.
Oh, hold on, sir.
Yeah, we're kind of formal around, so you have to
It's
stand
just
up and
like
speak, so.
You have to go to the podium and be recognized. That's the mic. Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind just stating your name before
Yeah,
you speak.
Douglas Trumper. And I'm the owner of 183 Sykes Street North.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Maybe you could just give us sort of a basic high level overview of what it is that you've applied
Yeah,
for?
so I just want to get a carport put in place. The house is 30 feet long and it'd be the back 20 feet of it towards, from the back of the house towards the front. So 20 feet would be a carport. And it'd be about 10 foot 5 inches from the house out. So it's get 2 feet on either side of the car. It's going to be supported by 3 6x6 posts. It's designed for 100 pounds per square foot loading, which accounts for rain, snow, drifting, rain, snow. I think the building permit or the building standard is 63 pounds per square foot. But because it could be drifting, which is what Tammy and I talked about, it's been designed for 100 pounds.
Very good.
So all the loading is accounted for. It's all vertical loads. There might be a question on the fact that I'm fastening to brick, but it is a double brick house. So that means every 6th course, there's a crossing that ties the inner brick to the outer brick. So when I did my back room, which is also a shed, it's a shed roof design, like you have here, Rick, I can't remember his last name, but he approved it, and it was based on 63 pounds per square foot. So it's basically vertical load only at the brick.
Mhm.
So
Thank
anyway.
you. And question from Vic here?
First of all, I wanted to say, Denise, thank you. I appreciate that you were able to get info prior to the meeting. That was great, avoiding delays. Yeah, I think what maybe Peter was about to ask was where is the board and batten?
Oh.
Is it like, is there a fascia on the front there or?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what drawings you have, but there'll be a horizontal cross member and it'd be like a triangle, a board and
Okay,
batten
yeah.
that faces.
And I noticed you have on your front railing is kind of a board and batten setup. Is it gonna be similar to that or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Color wise, it'll be close, whatever state is
Right.
close to that, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Vic. Any other questions from the table here? No? Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time very much.
Okay. Can I go? Or are you deciding today?
We're going to vote on whether we're going to approve the recommendation, and that will go to council for final approval. Okay, wonderful. So before I call a vote, any questions? Everybody's good? Okay, all in favor? Great, thank you. And that has been carried. Thank you very much for that.
Good.
You can ask me.
Council, how does that work?
We're just going to pause for one moment, guys.
Never say no. After these guys say this. I'd like to, yeah, I'd like to talk to you. And Tammy maybe. Oh, that's possible.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. So we're going to be moving on to item number 9 on our agenda. And so this is going to be item 9A, HAC 2024-05. This is the minor heritage permit delegated approvals. And I'll need a first and second to get this on the floor. Sue, is that correct?
No.
No, I don't. Okay. Okay, so would I turn this over to you, Denise, for some comments on that?
Yeah, so normally we don't have a lot to say about these, but we just want to bring them to your attention because we're required to through the delegation bylaw. So we do it in 2 ways. First, we bring it to you to let you know what was done through delegated approvals, delegated authority. And we do it again at the end of the year with all the other delegated authority to council in a kind of a larger report of the whole year. So these would have been approved by the director. Both of them went, it's interesting, they're the same property. One went to me, so I was the one who handled one of the files and then gave it to our director at the time. And Meredith did the other one. And it's funny that we both pretty much did these in isolation, but there you notice that there's a difference in time. So the owner was doing some maintenance work to their property and they asked for doing some window replacement, and paint some wooden trim or have it clad that was apparently needed to be done. And then there's a second permit for the same property that included both a sign for the new business in this traditional sign band area, and paint the existing siding again on top and adding some barn board. In that particular, both of those cases, interestingly enough, our Heritage Conservation District Plan background study doesn't identify any heritage value to that building, which I find interesting. I get that it's painted and it has some interesting additions, but it is an older building, so it has historical value in some ways. So the items that were done by delegated approval were meant to be more maintenance related and or on top or removing existing new facade materials and replacing with something else. So it wasn't covering up any heritage features. And that's why that they were done through delegated approval. I'm not 100% sure on this second one, which is the number 2, because I wasn't involved too much in it. I did peek at it when I created this report for you. In the past, these were done at a regular basis. So every meeting, if we had any, we would let you know. But then I think with some staffing challenges, we were doing them in bigger clumps. So I was doing 2, like maybe 1 after a few months. We came back and did 1 rather than regularly. The intention is to bring these back regularly. So every next meeting, if there had been any, we would tell you about them. I think the last one we had was from September. So last September we had a couple of them as well that were done. Most of them were signs. Like these would be things like Jake's Grab and Go sign, the Farm Fresh sign last year. I think there was maybe 4 signs last year that were done this way, that as long as they're within that normal sign band area, like Pom Pom and all those other ones that came up in the last while. They're usually delegated approval. Whether or not would be as if they're changing something beyond what's there now. That's where we haven't done them through delegated approval, like the Rexall sign we just dealt with.
Very good. Thank you for that, Denise. Any questions? Peter, go ahead, sir.
I just had one question, because these look like they involve windows, and one of the things I was wondering about, like some replacement of windows, it looks like.
Mhm.
And the question I guess I had was if you're dealing with an historic building and people are replacing windows, are they required as a general policy to just replace with like, or if, for example, are you to try and because quite often that's something that people often kind of cut corners on, because windows are expensive. And so you'll have a beautiful building and they'll shove in a window with a slider on the bottom or something, as opposed to what would have been historically accurate for it. And I'm wondering, do we have a policy about that, or should we have a policy about that? Because I don't, and I know those were done administratively, so that's why I'm kind of curious as to what you decide to do in those cases.
These are really great questions. So this committee may not be aware of one that we dealt with last year where they changed the openings of the windows. Because the idea is to keep the same traditional opening. And the guidelines generally support not replacement of windows if possible. So if they're original windows, in this case, these were not original windows. So because it's interesting, original windows that may have been put in 100 years ago, maybe in better condition than the ones that were put in the 70s, for example, or even the 90s. These ones weren't original, but they had to be the same general window. So the same design for the most part, and so they're replacing with nothing's changed. And that there's some nuance there. For example, we have had a few where there's a little bit of a different shape. Sometimes it's not really an arch necessarily. There's an arch in the brickwork, and then maybe there's an arch in the window, and then we've seen them get replaced with a square window, and either the arch gets covered up, or the window's behind it, or something different, or it gets removed. And the intention is to keep those original architectural features and not cover them up or detract from them. But the guidelines itself from the what we have to work with support keeping the original windows if possible. Because obviously once you replace them, you're always going to be replacing them after that, right? But if they're rotted, then, they're rotted. But the wooden windows from 100 years ago often last longer than vinyl windows do. So I think that's what we've looked at as is this minor? Is it replacing a vinyl window with the same window? As it generally style is what it was before. And if it is, then that's considered minor. If it's changing it to a completely different style of window or the opening's changing, that isn't minor.
Sorry, but I'm just a little bit unclear about that. Like, for example, if someone has already buggered up the window, so to speak, and put in that cheap window, are they required, is it sufficient that I put another cheap window in like that matches the aluminum with the slider, or is it expected that I should try and return it to what it was? Although there'd be clearly a significant cost to it. And then secondly, with your example of that's always a huge problem where they want to square off the window because it's much more expensive to have a kind of a round on the top. I take it if that has already been done, we don't make them take it back if it's coming up. But we might have to discuss whether they want to do that, if they need our permission to do it. Is that right?
So if I understand the question through you, Mr. Chair, I think what the question is, could we make them go back and repair to something to the original, better standard? And the answer is we can't make them do it, but we do encourage people, and we have had if some people want to. So there was a delegated permit we did last year that they are actually doing that. They're going back to what it used to look like. We've had a few people take off facades or change window openings to the original shape, because often they're filling in. And I'm looking at the actual one that they're replacing on this one, this was a few months ago, so I popped it up. They had a slight archway, and they probably in the 60s, 70s filled part of that in and put in an aluminum window, and that's what they're replacing. But I can't say to them, you have to go back to this other thing. I can recommend it, but I haven't been able to. I mean, this committee can say other things, and that's your choice, but I haven't made people go back to the original and do a restorative approach, but we have asked them to consider it. And sometimes it's improving the property. It's to their benefit. And we have seen people do that. There's actually a number of buildings where people have restored those features versus just replacing it with hey, it had aluminum. We did this 50 years ago. We'll put another one in.
Well, I understand that people might voluntarily do it, which is of course entirely different thing, and we like to encourage that. But I guess it's a kind of a curious situation where I take it if I have my aluminum window and I want to replace that, I would need to get permission to do that.
Yes.
So if I need to do that, then presumably, I guess when you say we can't make anybody do anything, I guess you could say, no, you can't replace that. I mean,
I can't make anyone.
No, I know you can't, but I guess the committee could say, no, we're not letting you replace it with another window. I don't know that we're going to, or that we should do it. I just put that out there as something to think about. Maybe it's too much power or ordering people to spend too much money. I don't know. But anyway, just a thought.
Thank you, Peter. And Vic, you had a question as well?
Well, actually, it's kind of building on the same point, and it's something I had noted here. First of all, I'm surprised that was considered non-heritage in the appendices of that thing. There is a heritage building hiding under there. I've never really noticed it until I looked at it. But it strikes me that, and the side windows, they actually took out, I'd say, a third of that arch back in the 60s or whenever they did it. And it was basically wood taking up that place, and then a rectangular window underneath. But there's also a full mansard roof covering the entire second story, which is ugly as hell, to be honest, but that was probably done in the 60s, 70s, 80s, who knows. It seems to me that, especially in regard to kind of the education part of what we discussed at the last meeting, that this is an opportunity, for encouragement to them to maybe do a more restorative approach. And as well, we have facade grants and things like that. And I'm thinking that the more we could do to try and get some synergy between those things and coordinate them in something like this. They're doing work anyway, even though it's somewhat minor, but maybe removing that roof and potentially restoring the windows would be a great thing. So I'm just thinking more of the education and recommendation. I'm glad to hear that you do recommend things to them.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what exactly is our role if it's not historical? Do we have any input? If it's not a historical building already, I mean, or is this just for information?
So this particular report is for information. So where we have issued a permit under delegated approval, I am required to tell you about it. And so I've done that in this by just listing it. Just so that you're aware, it's just for transparency. But yeah, even in buildings where in the district that are not historical in nature or not have no heritage value in and of themselves in isolation, the committee has made recommendations on things that would ensure that the district's character is maintained to the best way possible. So nothing that's significantly obtrusive or would damage the general character of that neighborhood. That's kind of the tone of how we've provided the recommendations. It's like the whole character could be affected by certain things that are proposed. Like if somebody wants to do a 40-story building in the middle of the district. Most of ours aren't that significant, but we have had some that have made a difference and have had, the committee has struggled with, and staff have struggled with as well. So there are, just because it may seem obvious that why would someone, want to do something that's not a great idea, maybe in the district. They sometimes do propose it. We try to work with them to make recommendations in field. Hey, what have you thought of this? Going by what I've experienced on the committee and the kinds of recommendations we've had out of the committee or suggestions, I give them a heads up, like the committee's interested in these sorts of things. These are the kinds of things they've talked about before. Have you thought of this? Here's what the guidelines say. I give them that heads up ahead of time. But that doesn't mean that someone couldn't have a modern building in the district or that it doesn't allow for that. It does allow for that. In this particular one, it is a historical building. It's an old building. And I suspect that whoever wrote the report either made a mistake or they maybe just because of the facade on the front, which is distracting, just didn't worry about the side. I didn't do that when I made my comments back to the applicant about the windows. Not seeing anything get worse is my absolute minimum. Like, let's not make anything worse, but I always recommend if we can improve it, we would. This one has been painted like this since I've lived here in 1999. So I'm not really sure what what they're thinking, but I think what they are doing is probably not making anything worse at all. It's certainly maintenance that has long overdue. But I don't know if they're planning to remove the front facade, for example, and kind of take it back. We have seen a few people do that and it's wonderful to see. It's made such an improvement downtown. But that's always, the recommendation that we've had if they're going to go to that level. And it may be that somebody would start with some painting and changing some windows and go to that as a follow-up and apply for grants for that because those grants have been given for that exact reason.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, over to you, Jen.
Just to follow up on that through the chair, Denise, with it not being heritage valued, it couldn't be a precedent then, could it, for someone else in the same area saying, okay, they were allowed to cover the wood trim and paint it black and put in these windows. It wouldn't be a precedent, right? That each is individual, that it couldn't be carried over.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. And that's because individually, this building may have its own, maybe the wood on the windows is completely rotted. That gives them a different baseline from somebody who just doesn't want that anymore and is ready to change it. This one, there is wood surrounding the windows, but it's not necessarily original. Like we talked about, some of its filler areas to take away from the archways. But yes, I think because most of the work that they were doing within that particular permit was on the upper part of the facade. Not that the upper facade is not important. I shouldn't say facade, but upper story windows. Not that the upper story is not as important, but most of the grant programs and things of that really focus on the the first floor level commercial facade and the improvements to that, because they're so important. The upper story ones are certainly important too, but they're not the focus of a lot of downtown programming. But that was probably in this particular one why it was considered minor, because it was the upper story replacement of non-heritage things. The building probably does have heritage value, but in this particular case, the stuff that they were changing was not heritage features. They weren't covering up the existing brick more or changing the archways more than they already are. They were just changing out those additions, like the smaller vinyl or aluminum windows and all of that. So hopefully that explains why in this one, it's not that we said, oh, it doesn't matter. It's not a heritage building according to the plan. I mean, it is an older building and we look at the district as a system. So because of that, I know that it may have effect to the building across the street and how it's perceived. This is the side street part on this particular one. The front, there was two front street, Sake Street windows that were involved. And then in that facade, Vic pointed out, it's not a great facade. The side windows are on Boucher Street, that facade hasn't been changed as much. And so you do have those architectural features still visible. So the last thing we would want is those to be covered up further.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Denise. Any other questions or comments with regards to this? Okay, very good. Thank you. So we're going to move on. Number 10 on our agenda here is committee inquiries. Do we have any inquiries at the Horseshoe here today? No, seeing none. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move on to communications, and just for information purposes, I'm going to read out what we have on the agenda here. The committee will consider correspondence received by members of the public during each meeting. To share your comments, thoughts, or concerns with members of the committee, the public can send an email to deputyclerk@meaford.ca. When emails are received to this email address, they will be compiled into a correspondence list, which is then distributed to the committee members prior to the meeting. The cover sheet of this list will be included on each meeting agenda. The contents of the correspondence list are not included on the public agenda to protect the privacy and personal information of those residents who choose to send their thoughts and comments. And the only item that we have listed here on the communications is the CHO 2024 conference invitation. Any questions or comments with regards to anything on communications? Okay, very good. So date of the next meeting, August 14th, 2024. And I want to say I appreciate everybody's time today. And it's sunny, so we've kept you long enough. So let's go enjoy some sunshine. And with that, I'll adjourn today's meeting.